2024, an election year like no other. From the candidates to the issues, from voter integrity and analysis, we'll discuss debates, trends, patterns, election laws, and more. This is Vote 2024, Path to the Polls.
Hello, I'm Scott Johnson in for Bruce Hamilton this week on Path to the Polls on a very special edition because tonight is Super Tuesday, the biggest voting day in the United States other than Election Day in 2024 in November. So we want to talk all about it. We got two very important topics we're going to talk about today. First, in a little bit, we're going to talk to Chris Hand here, the host of the Hand on Government segment, about Super Tuesday and what we can expect. And after that, we're going to bring in Clay County Supervisor of Elections, Chris Chambliss. Chris, thank you for joining us today. And we're going to talk all about election integrity. Supervisor Chambliss has been a part of a national task force with the Department of Homeland Security. He just wrapped up some meetings in Washington, D.C. on election integrity. We're going to talk about that in just a bit. But Chris Hand, let me start with you. Today is Super Tuesday, such an important day, possibly the day when the election, the general, could theoretically be set. Right now on the GOP side, and let's start with the GOP side, it is Donald Trump winning all but I believe one, Washington, D.C., which Nikki Haley took on Sunday. Where do you see it going tonight? We have, and I want to look at these states, Alabama, Arkansas, Alaska, California, Utah, Vermont, all over the country voting today. This is a map you're looking at right now on your screen. Chris, what do you expect tonight after the ballots are cast and we know the results of these states?
Well, Scott, Super Tuesday is a huge day in the nomination calendar. This has been in place for the better part of the last 4 decades and really is usually decisive in determining who's going to be the Republican or Democratic nominee for president. As you say, there are 15 states plus a territory, American Samoa, that are deciding either one or both parties' nominations today. Lots of delegates at stake. Just for example, on the Republican side, there's about 2,500 total delegates. A third of those are at stake today. For the Democrats, about 4,000 total pledged delegates, and about 35% of those at stake today. So a lot happening. And as you say, it's from coast to coast. We're seeing this all over the country. I think we know at this point who the nominees for the two parties are going to be. For the Democrats, it's going to be President Joe Biden. For the Republicans, it's former President Donald Trump.
Well, on the Republican side, yes, that pretty much everyone kind of agrees that, except Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley has not dropped out of this race. She has continued and plugged away. Where do you see the Haley campaign going after tonight?
Well, they certainly have the money to continue. And as you say, look, she's been receiving somewhere between 30 and 40% in most of the states that she's contested. She won the District of Columbia primary on Sunday. But in most contests, former President Trump has won those. She has the money to continue if she wants. Again, today is Super Tuesday, but next week are several other states, including the state of Georgia, and then 2 weeks after that, some other states, including the state of Florida. So she has some funding to go forward, but that's a strategic decision that she and her campaign are going to have to make. And candidates decide to stay or leave races for all sorts of reasons. There's certainly one calculation is can they be successful? But there are other reasons candidates stay or leave races. Do they have a message that they want to continue to bring to the electorate? Former Governor and Ambassador Haley recently has sort of turned into the message that she does not believe that either of the presumptive nominees, either former President Trump or former President Biden, should be the next president, and that she is presenting herself as an alternative. So that messaging can be a reason that some candidates carry forward.
There's been a lot of talk of what her motivation is. Is her motivation, a cabinet position within a potential Trump administration? There's also been talk, because there's been a lot of talk of a no-labels party, possibly a third-party candidate, and whether or not she would have an interest in that. I believe she's denied it at every turn. Do you think there's an interest in Haley pursuing the presidency in a fashion other than as the GOP nominee?
Well, I can't speculate as to Governor and Ambassador Haley's motives. Only she knows kind of why she entered the race and why she might continue the race. What I would say, it's not unusual for someone who's run for president once to run for president in the future. So this could well be, if she's not successful in 2024. And again, no one has clinched the nomination yet, although it looks fairly apparent where this is going. If she decides that she's not going to be successful this year, she may decide that there's a future year that she wants to run for president, and continuing in the campaign now is kind of helpful to that purpose.
And real quickly, I believe her national standing is increasing through this process. I mean, 8 months ago, I don't know that she had as much visibility among the general electorate as she does today.
Well, I mean, look at what she's accomplished. There were originally 12 candidates, I believe, for the Republican nomination. Now there's 2, Donald Trump and Nikki Haley. So she has outlasted a variety of better-known figures, and as you say, raised her standing in the polls, and I think now comes to represent a significant segment of the Republican electorate. Has also been successful in winning some independent voters as well, which of course are decisive in many elections. So, you know, win, lose, or draw in the 2024 GOP nomination contest, a lot more people know who Nikki Haley is and what she stands for than they did before this started.
I want to talk, I do want to get back to the GOP because there's some things I want to go over going forward. But on the Democratic side, I mean, this isn't really a race. It's President Biden's. I mean, we've seen Dean Phillips, I believe, from Minnesota trying, but getting nowhere. So it's President Biden's. The only issue that really has come up was in the state of Michigan in the last week or two, when there were around 100,000 people voted uncommitted. It was somewhat of an organized protest vote over the Israel-Hamas conflict in Michigan. Do you see that being a broader issue tonight?
Well, there were a lot of Michigan-specific dynamics to that particular contest, including some of the situation in the Middle East right now and how that impacts the domestic vote. I don't think anyone anticipates that President Biden's going to do anything but sweep all of the Super Tuesday primaries. I mean, the initial polling suggests that he's going to do very well across the board tonight. But again, he cannot clinch the nomination tonight because of the way these delegates are awarded. And let's remember, that's the key to these nominating contests, is it's people actually electing delegates to vote for the party candidates at their conventions, which for the Republicans will be in Milwaukee in July, and for the Democrats will be in Chicago in August. They're voting for delegates because of the rules about how delegates are allocated. President Biden probably cannot formally clinch the Democratic nomination for another couple of weeks, but there's really not much doubt at this point about his being the nominee.
Do you foresee that protest vote issue with Israel-Hamas still going on now? We don't know where it will be in 6 months, remaining an issue in the general, where we could see something like that happen, because 100,000 votes, or even a sliver of that in Michigan, sure, which is razor thin,
of course,
you know, is a big deal. I mean, could you see that still being an issue in the general?
It depends, I think, on what the circumstances are in the Middle East, how that situation develops. I mean, it's very hard to predict now what the circumstances in the world and on the ground will be in November when people are casting general election ballots. But I think it is something that both presumptive nominees have to watch. President Biden, as you say, there was this issue in Michigan. I think the main question is, how good are both candidates doing at uniting the party and bringing everyone into the fold? You've identified some challenges that President Biden's been working with. In terms of former President Trump, again, we've seen Nikki Haley and others getting a segment.
I want to ask about that. I want to ask about that. On the Haley thing, so she's getting, let's say, depending on the state, 20 to 30% of the vote. How does the Trump campaign hold on to that and bring them back into the fold, assuming this is over and he is the eventual nominee? I mean, every election cycle, there are people who vote for the other person. But how does the Trump campaign retain those people who were supporting Haley, either because they like Ambassador Haley or because they were voting against former President Trump?
Well, that is you've identified what is the crucial question for the Trump campaign after the primary season, is how do they unite the party again? I think what should be concerning to them is that a number of those Haley voters have said that they probably won't be inclined to vote for President Trump, particularly if he is convicted of a crime. Obviously, there are multiple criminal indictments sitting out there, and so I think that is going to be the key question. How do they kind of unite the party? Now, a lot of polling suggests that Republicans are fairly united behind President Trump's candidacy. I think the bigger question is those ever decisive, independent, or as we call them here in Florida, NPA or no party affiliation voters. They tend to decide every election, Scott. Their votes tend to be crucial in deciding who's going to win. And we're seeing that in a lot of states where independents can cross over or can participate in party primaries. They are not voting for former President Trump. Many of them are voting for Governor and former Ambassador Haley. So that's going to be a crucial voting block to watch. Not just can former President Trump unite Republicans, same question for President Biden and the Democrats, but who can win those decisive independent voters? That's the election right there.
And the other thing, we talk about the winning of the vote. We also, there's the motivation of getting them to come out and vote. I mean, on the Democrat side, we talked about those uncommitted, like, is the question, do they stay home? On the Republican side, maybe those Haley supporters, do they go, I don't want to vote for either of them, I'm going to stay home? Is that a realistic thing, too?
Well, it is, or not just stay home, but again, there's the prospect this year that there could be multiple third-party candidates
like
on
Robert,
the ballot as well.
RFK,
right.
yeah, Robert
exactly.
F. Kennedy
So
Jr.,
that'll be the question that I think each of the major campaigns is concerned about. Voters that they think should be in their column, how do they make sure they stay in their column and actually go out to vote as opposed to staying home or going to the polls and casting a ballot for one of those third-party candidates?
So we're going into, if things wrap up tonight, the next thing is coalescing the party and going into the party conventions. Both candidates, Trump and Biden, have dealt with issues. Biden has had issues come up with age concerns. Trump's had those as well, and also issues with the legal. Could you see any wrangling at the conventions this summer, or do you think the parties are going to get things in order before they go into the conventions?
Well, again, if any of us had the power of foresight, it would be a very different picture.
Sure.
What we just don't know is what will happen between now and July or now of August. If there's some very significant event on either side, is it possible there could be a brokered convention, as they call it? Sure. That hasn't happened since 1968, the last time the Democrats were in Chicago. So it's unlikely at this point. I think what's much more likely that we're going to see in advance of each of those conventions is typically what we've just talked about, trying to unite the party. Former President Trump has to select a running mate. The parties have to kind of finalize their platforms and do all those other prerequisites to get ready for the general election contest.
And the running mate, that's going to be one of the big things on the Trump side that people are watching, wouldn't you say? Because,
no question.
You know, is it Haley? Is it DeSantis? Is it some of these other members of the GOP? I want to say there is a senator, Katie Britt, is doing the response to the State of the Union later this week.
From Alabama, right.
From Alabama.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there's a lot of people out there that are raising their profile right now as former President Trump looks at a potential running mate.
Well, that's right. And, you know, again, he tends to be a little unconventional in how he does things. So traditionally, a party nominee announces the running mate right before the convention. I don't think we can sort of assume that's going to be the case. Former President Trump might decide to do it earlier, might decide to have a running mate even months in advance of a convention. There's been lots of names speculated about. I think there's a few things we know for sure about the running mate. It will not be Mike Pence, who was vice president during his previous term.
That was pretty apparent,
yeah, and of course, who was a competitor during the Republican primaries this year. I think it's unlikely it will be any of his competitors for the Republican nomination.
Why do you think that is?
Well, you know, these nominees.
Tim Scott has been talked about. Sure. Even Governor DeSantis was talked about again in the last few weeks.
Let me revise that. Any candidates who have not both endorsed him and enthusiastically campaigned for him,
I understand,
not likely to be the nominee. Senator Scott from South Carolina has clearly done that, is now a surrogate for the former president. Governor DeSantis has endorsed him, but has not sort of been active on the campaign trail. And former Governor and Ambassador Haley, again, because of the nature of this contest, seems unlikely that she's going to be the nominee. So of the former competitors, the most likely is Tim Scott. But other than that, the names being discussed did not run in the 2024 Republican contest. And again, we'll find out sometime between now and early July who that nominee is.
Well, Chris Hand, host of the Hand on Government segment, thanks for joining us, Chris, today.
Thank you
it's
for having
me. It's going to be an exciting night to watch.
It sure will be.
Thanks,
you.
Chris, so much. So in addition to Super Tuesday, we also need to talk about the other huge issue in election integrity. We bring in Chris Chambliss, Clay County Supervisor of Elections, a longtime Supervisor of Elections, Chris. And you become a little more intriguing than you already are because of something you did in Washington, D.C. last month, meeting with the Department of Homeland Security. You're one of a few supervisors of election nationally to serve with the DHS. Talk to me about your role and what you've been doing in Washington, D.C.
So when elections was created as a critical infrastructure, one of the first things that they do is they set up a governing coordinating council as well as a sector coordinating council. And then shortly after that, they created CISA, which is Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency. And the reason why they do that is to provide a federal nexus to the state, local, tribal territories with regards to a single whole-of-nation approach to election security. And so they set that up, and we create the policy both on a national level and again that reporting to the state level and then from the states back up to the federal government with regards to cybersecurity and infrastructure security.
What are some security issues you are seeing after going to this that you know the feds and the state level governments are focused on?
Scott, I think it's very important to first lay out some ground rules. First and foremost, when you talk about elections insecurity, it is not the tabulation system.
Yeah, that's a big thing. And let's stop on that. I want to stop on that very subject. Tabulation system was a big complaint in 2020 with suspicions and conspiracy theories out there about tabulation equipment and whether it's attached to the internet can be manipulated. Let's hammer that home.
So first and foremost, tabulation equipment is never connected to the internet at any time. Also, tabulation equipment is always under two-person control, sealed, locked. When it gets delivered to the polling location. And then first and foremost, the first action on election day is to produce a zeros totals tape. But let me back up just a little bit before that, because one of the primary securities in elections is what's called the logic and accuracy test. Prior to that, there is a pre-logic and accuracy test. Here in Clay County, we have literally cast tens of thousands of ballots. We've probably eclipsed the number of ballots that will be voted in the presidential preference primary in our testing. And then we have a public logic and accuracy test to where interested parties, we're talking about candidates, we're talking about the parties, we're talking about the news media, will come and observe this very public event. Every process in elections is just that, a public event. And we welcome public scrutiny for that. So oftentimes, especially in social media, they talk about that there is the ability to penetrate our election systems, and that's just not the case. Never has been the case. As a matter of fact, there has never been a reported tabulation penetration in all of our nation. And so I think that's very important to note.
And how does that go back after Election Day and, you know, you want to go back and do the recounts and know, you know, check the totals? How does that process work?
Well, of course, in Florida, paper is the primary method of voting, so all ballots are cast on paper. And that's important because we can reconstruct, we can actually retabulate that election over and over and over again for 22 months until that material is scheduled to be destroyed. And that's important because paper gives the voter the opportunity to view the selections that are made prior to casting that ballot. But the security, the comfort is that logic and accuracy test, because if you can tabulate accurately 100% of the time, then it goes to further the belief that the equipment is in fact tabulating properly. But most importantly, in the state of Florida, after the election, there is a verification of the known results from the tabulation system compared to the actual paper trail there at each one of the precincts, and that is reconciled prior to those preliminary results on election night to become unofficial and then official votes. And then we do an audit, and in Clay County, we audit 100%. Every single candidate, every single contest, every single ballot, every single election. So you don't have to take Chris's word with regards to the accuracy. I use a dissimilar system that's able to verify and demonstrate the accuracy of the election, and that should give the voter peace.
On the issue of not just the voting day and the voting process, but the lead up. You were telling me on the DHS level, there were some concerns about, because one of the big topics right now in this world is AI. Talk to me about what's going on with AI and concerns over that.
I think generative AI is very concerning for a number of reasons. Number one, you're able to take photographic quality images and construct them digitally. Of course, one of the most famous ones is the Pope wearing a very outlandish outfit and having 4 fingers on his right hand, as well as, in addition to that, we're starting to see generative audio. In the New Hampshire election, you had robocalling that had President Biden's voice telling voters that it was not necessarily for them to brave the weather on election day, and that there would be an opportunity afterwards to be able to do that. You have video to where I've seen one to where past President Obama talks about his personal chef, to where you have Tom Hanks that's hawking skincare products. And so you really have to be on your game with regards to artificial intelligence. I've heard it called, it is both the best thing as was the invention of nuclear energy, and it can also be the worst thing. So there's AI is very good in some respects. It's also very bad. They have AI now that can generate malicious code without an individual having the ability to know coding knowledge.
Since 2020, the issue of election integrity is, well, it was also big in 2016, has just exploded. Former President Trump making a lot of accusations that he was not able to prove in court about the election was rigged, of that nature. In 2016, we saw questions of Russian interference. On your end, being a supervisor of elections, dealing with voters who have this concern, do you hear that? Do you run into voters who are peppering you with questions, things of that nature?
Almost on a daily, if not weekly basis, do I have individuals that have heard something, specifically on social media, that gives them pause. And we have held elections expos to where we take citizens through the voter registration process, the requesting of a vote by mail ballot, all the way through to the tabulation of the vote in the polling location. And we openly show them not only the process, because we're well aware of getting the ballot, going to the tabulator, inserting the ballot, and getting the I voted sticker, but all of the items and preparations that are behind the scenes. It's almost like the old line from The Wizard of Oz, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Well, what we want to do is we want to dispel those myths. We want to invite the public to come and take a part, not only casting their ballot as their democratic obligation and duty and right, but also to come and get involved, have skin in the game, and watch the process.
When you were in DC, and you've probably dealt with other supervisors in different states, different municipalities, are you seeing similar concerns brought to them?
You know, jurisdictionally, things change. You have some jurisdictions to where there is a number of concerns about the security of both election workers as far as, and also elections staff. Thankfully, in Florida, thankfully, in Clay County, we have a wonderful relationship with all of the alphabets, the FBI, the CISA, and we have a wonderful relationship with our sheriff, Michelle Cook, that provides not only an intel, but also a resource to make sure that individuals can cast a ballot free of coercion here in Clay County.
And I want to talk about the other thing that's become more and more common in many municipalities, mail-in voting. Talk to me about security of mail-in voting.
So the security of a mail-in ballot is virtually the same as early voting or on election day. In order to register to vote, prior to requesting that vote by mail ballot, you have to provide a photo and signature ID. We utilize forensic signature recognition. Our staff, 100% of our staff attends a forensic signature recognition course. That's not necessarily the concern. Did I use H? Did I use my full middle name? Did I use Christopher or Chris? No, what we're looking at is the angle, the slope, the top, the peaks and the valleys, the way that you make the little smiley face across your eyes and the swoop on your T, forensically looking at that signature. And then we compare that to the voter certificate on each and every one of the vote by mail ballots. Of course, drop boxes. There's a great concern about unattended drop boxes, just like there is a concern about mailboxes and about the postal service not handling that ballot correctly. In Clay County, you can go to trackmyclayballot.com and you can follow the progress of your ballot from request to counted and watch that entire process.
One more time on that website.
Trackmyclayballot.com.
Is that, when did you guys set that up?
We set that up in 2016 as a former military veteran. It was very important for me to be able to provide a service to our military members and to our citizens who live abroad to be able to check the process of their vote by mail ballot.
Has that been helpful in alleviating some concerns that people can see, yeah, my ballot's making it where it needs to go?
Especially with the informed delivery that the United States Postal Service has created that provides that tracking from the voter's box to our mailbox.
And when you do run into a ballot that, like, something's off on this ballot, what happens then?
We contact the voter, any method available. We'll send them a letter, we'll call them, we'll send them an email saying that there was a problem with their signature or lack of a signature. The legislature has created a law and procedure to where once we notify them, they can cure that ballot deficiency with providing a photo and a signature ID to on an affidavit to affirm that that is in fact their ballot. And we also, anyone that comes into question to where the canvassing board deems as problematic, we'll send that to the state attorney. And the state attorney, Melissa Nelson, is very, very good and attentive to looking at abnormalities in mail voting.
One final question, we see it nationally. We see one jurisdiction, they're done. They're counted, they're done. We see another jurisdiction, hours and hours and hours and hours. Is there any reason why some are slow, some are fast?
Well, you know, elections are a state right. So, of course, you look in Pennsylvania, they can't even begin to canvass vote-by-mail ballots until Election Day. Transfer that to Florida, to where the legislature allows us 20 days prior to the election to start canvassing that ballot. So while we will have 30,000 or more vote-by-mail ballots in a presidential election, we can begin taking bites of that number in advance, not releasing the results, but processing those ballots so we can turn around results quickly on Election Day.
Well, Chris Chambliss, Clay County Supervisor Elections, thanks so much. It's been very enlightening and informative. We appreciate you coming on the show today.
Certainly.
Well, thank you for joining us on this episode of Path to the Polls. I am Scott Johnson, filling in for Bruce Hamilton, who will be back next week when we rejoin you. But tonight is a big night. Of course, continue to monitor all our newscasts this evening for the latest results, as well as live updates as they happen on Super Tuesday at news4jax.com. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
See why every day more people are choosing News 4 Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.